as Dave mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about managing an export controls compliance program. I'm a partner at the firm Bader Wynn, and I'm the chair of the global trade group there. I'm also an appointed member of the Department of Commerce District Export Council, which is a position comprised of industry members who are advisors to the Department of Commerce. So just as Larry mentioned, with regard to DTAG and comments by industry to the government regarding military products, if you have any questions or comments, policy issues that you want to address with regard to commerce and BIS, the District Export Council for the area is also a means to do that. So let's turn a little bit this morning to talking about establishing, maintaining an export controls compliance program. It's a topic that really we could go on for a couple of days, and typically when we set up programs for companies, it takes multiple visits and many days and weeks and sometimes months. So I'm going to try to condense the morning's program down to mostly anecdotal information, because I could provide you a slide deck of 50 pages, and we still we do not have time to really go through more than about 5 pages of it. So please do raise any questions as we go along. So why are we here? What's the importance of an export controls compliance program? Sometimes it may seem self-evident that compliance is less expensive than remediation. But if there's any question in your minds, here are some of the sanctions and penalties and fines that are possible under the commerce regulations. Even under the commercial products regulations administered by BIS, these are what I call at the farm kinds of liabilities. When we get to the ITAR, administered by the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, the sanctions are even more draconian and are even a little bit more scary. Some of the things that we'll talk about a little bit as we go along are some of the non-financial penalties that can be quite severe and crippling for many companies, which involve debarment from government contracts, temporary or even permanent denial of export privileges, and the extreme cost of compliance monitors that can be imposed if violations are severe enough. So certainly we want to avoid that kind of occurrence, and export compliance programs are the way to do that. There are a number of agencies that have jurisdiction over compliance programs for exports. DDTC's Enforcement Division, BIS's Office of Export Enforcement, the FBI and ICE also are very much involved in investigations and contact with companies. So all of these agencies are agencies, as they say, that are here to help you. But sometimes a certain contact with them, and certainly their enforcement divisions, are ones that we'd probably rather avoid if possible. So let's talk a little bit about compliance programs. I spend a lot of my day working with companies with regard to both import and export compliance programs and internal controls of all kinds. What I'm going to go through this morning, since we only have a few minutes really, is I'm going to take the BIS 9 points that they use in their guidelines. Both DDTC and BIS have issued guidance to industry regarding what both agencies and the government generally would like to see as elements of an effective export controls program. In many cases, and in really nearly all cases, the elements are very similar if not overlapping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 9 points from commerce and apply and talk a little bit about how they apply both in the military and commercial context. So So the first one is management commitment. Commitment to compliance has got to be throughout the whole organization. But certainly it's got to start from the top. You can't have compliance that's delegated to a lower or mid-level official and then or employee and then have plausible deniability by upper management. We'll talk about that some more. Continuous risk assessment. Now, for those of you who might have background in manufacturing, or particularly automotive manufacturing, does that bring to mind something that came out of Japan a number of years ago? Of course, there's a debate as to whether it really originated in the United States rather than Japan. But continuous risk assessment sounds to me a lot like the Toyota production system, which is continuous improvement. And basically, that's what we have to do with compliance programs. They have to be living programs, and they have to be continuous. They can't be programs that you expect to start, to finish in a couple of weeks, and put on the shelf. We'll talk about that some more. A formal written program. Well, certainly written programs and written elements are an important aspect and a required aspect by both agencies. They expect to see that your compliance program has a written element to it. But written elements are not where compliance programs begin and end. They're really just a departure point. Training. Training obviously has to be part of that living element of compliance programs. Without training and continuous awareness, refreshing and updating of compliance awareness within your organization's culture, compliance doesn't really continue. What I mean here by pre and post export compliance is that your export compliance program has to include both measures before you ship, after you ship, analysis of your products as they're being developed, review of who your customers are, review of what they understand before and after the shipment. All of these are different points in the whole export process, but they're all equally as important. So your compliance program isn't just a program that deals with what do I do before I ship this product out to the customer? And isn't it true that my responsibilities end as soon as I ship? Well, the answer is no, your responsibilities don't just end after you ship that product. And it doesn't matter whether it's a product in the marine transportation industry, aerospace, unmanned flight, whatever the particular industry is. There's no industry where you can say our obligations for export controls compliance end only when we ship the product. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. Number 6 is record keeping. Again, I talked about compliance programs being a living program within your company and within your organization's culture. Record keeping is part of that written component, but again, it's only one aspect of it, but it's an important one. We'll talk about that as well. Internal and external monitoring. Monitoring can happen both within your organization by your employees, and it can also happen externally through third parties. I would propose that both elements are important for an effective program. Then we'll also talk about what happens when things go wrong in items 8 and 9. Compliance programs, I think, need to also provide employees with the knowledge of how do I identify if something is going wrong? What do I do with that information about something going wrong? And who do I talk to? And what are the company's options in resolving issues when export controls violations are possibly in the mix? So what I'm going to turn to now, and I know that's really fast, is I'm going to talk about all of these a little bit more. But I'm going to talk about all of these in the context of comments that I think are sort of representative of comments by clients that I've heard over a couple of decades of doing this when it comes to these different elements of an export controls compliance program. So let's turn to that first one. management commitment. So I've heard our business is mostly commercial. Occasionally we do something military or exotic, as one of my clients likes to put it. So why do we need a compliance program? I think a lot of companies, unless you're a defense contractor or specific type of company, may have a mix of both commercial and military products, commercial and military technology and technical data, as well as parts and components. Sometimes that mix of commercial and military may change from 90% commercial to 10% military. Maybe it's 60% commercial, maybe it's 40% military, but it fluctuates up and down. And often in the trough of when there's very little military work, clients will say, well, do I really have to have a compliance program? Whether or not it's an ITAR compliance program or a BIS compliance program, do I need to have one? And also, executives will say, you know, I have many, many priorities. Can't somebody else take care of this and be involved with this? So what do you think about that? Do you need a program, even though you don't have that much military work? We'll take you off the hook. How do you know that? How do you know whether you need a program unless you have at least enough awareness within your organization to determine with that new PO that has come in, that next project, that next order, that's going to throw you into a new development cycle, a new sales cycle, a new product management cycle that will now be more engender more military or at least highly controlled commercial technology, where you'll really need to have a program in place. And it's often too late to put it in place after you've gotten the PO. You really need to have your export controls compliance program in place when that purchase order comes in, rather than trying to play catch up. Because as we may talk about maybe at another time, there are plenty of opportunities as soon as you get technical data that is of a controlled nature, whereby if you are not handling it properly and you're not distributing it within your organization in the proper way and handling it under proper controls, or maybe sharing it with a vendor who shouldn't really receive that information because they're not export controls compliant, then you can have problems. You can have violations occur before you're even able to get a program in place. So because of the lack of time, let's continue to go down the list. So continuous risk assessment. As I analogized before, you know, in the Toyota production system, continuous improvement is really important. Well, I think it's the same thing for an export controls compliance program. It's not a matter of will it take a few days, weeks, or months to put my program in place. The answer that your personnel really should be asking and that you should be supporting is, how will I support this for the long term? And I don't need to actually know when it's going to be finished, because it's really never finished. As you all know, from quality control, quality assurance programs, your ISO program doesn't end. Your AS9100 program doesn't end simply because you become certified. That's only the beginning. And so the same thing is, you should have the same attitude with regard to export controls compliance programs. Okay, formal written policy. Policies and procedures are really important. You know, all companies have them. They are across the board in all subjects. It's the same thing with export controls. But again, your written policies, as I've said many times before in other contexts, if your policies are embodied in a book that goes on your shelf, is that effective? And then the next question you should ask is, where do export controls compliance programs, or compliance programs of any type, where do they reside? So in your organization, they reside in all of you and in me. They don't reside on a shelf or in a book. They reside in all of us, or they don't actually exist. At least that's my proposition. So, ongoing compliance training. So training is that vehicle through which we're able to remind ourselves what we need to do in having an effective program. It's one way. There are other ways, but certainly training doesn't just happen because I send an employee to a seminar. As we all know, you can go to a seminar. You can go to this seminar. You can get materials from all of us. You can go back to your offices, and you can never look at them again. I would certainly hope that that's not the case with ours, where there's mine or any other speakers. But naturally, things, we all get busy and things happen. So you want to make sure that training doesn't just happen once and you forget about it just like you forgot about that book that you put on the shelf. You want to make sure that training is something that happens periodically and that it happens in different ways. It's not just sending somebody to a seminar. It's internal. It's training that's devised by your own people. Because remember, when your own personnel devise compliance measures, have input into the process, develop ways for you to apply it within your organization, then it's a more living, natural, organic way of applying compliance. It's not something imposed by a speaker at a seminar. It's not something you read in a book, like you have to apply, that probably doesn't apply to your industry. But if it's something that you can arrange to have your own personnel figure out after maybe some input from the outside, that can be a very powerful way of making sure that compliance actually lives within your organization. So pre and post compliance screening. What I meant by that, though, it's not just screening. Certainly, but you might start off the process by screening whether your customers, your vendors, your third-party business partners are involved in activities or perhaps placed on a U.S. government consolidated screening list maintained by the Department of Commerce or different individual export controls compliance lists that are maintained by different agencies. I think Larry would probably talk about the specially designated list that is maintained by OFAC. So you want to make sure that that's part of the process, but then there are other classification analysis that goes on. There's other documentation that is done. There's other record keeping. There's other communications to your vendors and customers throughout the process, before and after you ship, to make sure that export controls obligations of your company are fulfilled, but also that you inform your customers, vendors, and third-party business partners that their obligations under the export controls regulations of the United States are also upheld, and that they understand that they have obligations even after you ship to them. So that's what I call the duty to notify. So let's go on to record keeping. We touched upon this in different ways, but record keeping is, as I call it, that way that you can prove that you have an effective program. As one manager once said to me, we have documentation for all our ITAR exports. I said, great. Who maintains that? Well, let's see. Each individual project manager maintains his or her records for each individual shipment. So, anybody think that there's a problem with that? Or is that fine? Any thoughts?
I gotta find all that stuff.
That's a good comment, Eric. So, if each individual project manager throughout your organization, even if you're small, but certainly if you're large and like Boeing, if you have each individual project manager holding on to their own documentation for shipment, and certainly the compliance documents, how are you ever going to find that when you really need it in a hurry? When one of Adam's friends in enforcement knocks on your door and says, can we talk a little bit about that shipment that went out on April 16th, 2014 to Germany? It's PO number XYZ, and it's part number ABC, and you scratch your head and try to figure out where those documents might have gone. Export controls compliance means that you have records, but it means that you can also access them, and you understand where they fit into your compliance program. Internal and external monitoring. As I mentioned before, sending employees to seminars is great, but I think that that's really just a departure point. You really want to make sure that you do more than simply have your compliance program being that you send people to seminars, or that you even bring in consultants or attorneys. But you want to make sure that you get the most out of this. And if we don't talk about infusing what we know into your organization in some way that's meaningful, we're not doing our jobs. So you want to make sure that people don't just give you a deliverable. Compliance is not about deliverables. It's not about me writing something and saying, here's something that you could use. If I don't say, and I want to figure out a way to make sure that it's really appropriate for your company, then again, I'm not doing my job. So, let's see, where did I leave off here? Okay, so 8 and 9. How do we deal with violations? How do we deal with problems and issues? Your programs don't necessarily your programs aren't necessarily pessimistic or defeatist if you try to anticipate that issues will happen. With regard to compliance and export controls and import and customs compliance as well, it's not as though it's not really, well, I should say, the question really isn't will something happen, but it's when something will happen. And let me move to the next slide as an example of this. Even the largest companies have problems. And this is simply because Boeing is a very public company. And I don't think we have anybody from Boeing here. Do we have anybody from Boeing here today? Great. They've seen this slide before, and I just apologize to whoever is from Boeing when I talk about it. But again, it's not if something's going to happen; it's when something's going to happen. Even Boeing has a lot of problems. Now, if you do the math, those fines over the last 16 or over the last 18 years amount to almost $30 million. Now, how many companies in here could sustain $30 million in fines and penalties over the course of 18 years? As I said before when we started, a lot of these penalties are bet-the-fine kinds of penalties, and naturally, your exports may not rise to the level of volume that Boeing might be engaged in, or that the nature of the shipments might be not the same technical data or severity of these kinds of shipments. Nonetheless, take it as by analogy that fines can be significant, penalties can be significant. One thing I'd like to mention also is that in the course of these last 4 enforcement actions against Boeing, you'll notice that the government has looked at Boeing's internal compliance programs very, very closely, as they do all companies where they investigate, and certainly all companies where fines and penalties might be assessed. And they've said, we want you to allocate almost $3 million to internal compliance programs. Now, a lot of my clients, $3 million would be a sizable, if not vastly sizable, portion of their proceeds for a significant time period. So certainly, I wouldn't want to have a huge percentage of my revenue dedicated towards fixing problems. I think it's, as I said at the beginning, prevention is a lot less expensive than remediation. So let's move on. So I'm just going to, how much time do I have?
About 5 minutes.
Okay, great. So I want to finish up with just a few additional words about some aspects of compliance programs that clients often have questions about. So one question is, what do we use program and does it apply to me? Well, whether it applies to you is sometimes a question mark, but it's really a question mark that's easily answered by the regulations. Here under the ITAR, it mentions that anyone, any person who engages in the U.S. in the business of manufacturing, exporting, or temporarily importing certain kinds of products, defense articles, needs to register with EDTC. Let me just focus for a minute, since a number of you are in manufacturing, and whether you're manufacturing in the marine industry, in aerospace, in ground vehicles, in any kind of vehicles whatsoever, and other kinds of products. If you're a manufacturer of a defense article, you need to register with DDTC. Incumbent upon you in registering with the DDTC is to have an effective program. So I once had an area company say, well, we just coat things, we paint things, we put coatings on parts and components manufactured by other companies. So we're not making those parts. We're just putting something on them. Is that manufacturing? And the answer is yes, that's manufacturing. So take a good hard look at whether your activities are more covered by the regulations than you might otherwise think. And also, I might just mention that compliance programs are a mitigating factor in investigations and enforcement actions by the government. And so that's a very important factor as well. Your compliance programs will show, well, I should say, a compliance program that you're honestly trying to make effective can be a factor in mitigating any problems that arise. I think probably the worst thing that you can do is to start a compliance program and just put it in place for show. Just putting a compliance program in place for show is probably even worse than not having a compliance program to begin with. So if you're going to make the effort and maintain it. And there are some other slides in my presentation, but I'm going to finish with this slide today, which is to make sure that your export controls compliance program should ensure that your employees, with regard to new transactions, transactions to recurring customers, development of new technology, whatever it may be, they answer what I call the 2 Ds as a dog, 2 Ds and the 4 or 5 Ws. And what I mean by that is that your employees fulfill a duty to inquire and a duty to notify. A duty to inquire of your business partners, are they export controls compliant before you send that technical data that might be controlled to them? And have you notified your business partners through destination control statements and other export control certification documentation that they have responsibilities once you send your products to them? The four W's are who, what, where, and why. You know, who's getting the product? In other words, are they a party that's authorized to get the product? Because it may be controlled either under the Export Administration regulations for commercial products or under the ITAR for military products. Where's it going? Where are the places where that product will transit? Where's the place where that product will end up? Where will it land? So the ultimate destination, the intermediate destinations, your intermediate consignees, your ultimate consignees, your end user, your ultimate end user. Who are all those parties to the transaction? Have they been cleared through searching the appropriate U.S. government screening lists? What is the product to begin with? So make sure that you do your classification. Is the product even something that is controlled for export controls purposes? But if you say that it's not, why isn't it? So an export controls compliance program, in my mind, isn't just someone saying, well, I don't think this device is military. I don't think it's controlled under the EAR either. We'll call it EAR 99. It's so easy to do. Oh, it's EAR 99, doesn't need a license. You can send it just about anywhere. Well, your documentation should have a reason. Not only that you looked at that device and said, I don't think it's control, I think it's EAR 99, but that there's really a reason for it, and there's a justifiable reason for it. If it needs a license, or is it controlled? Is it controlled under the ITAR? Is it controlled under the EAR? Is it, as Adam talked about, is it a product that might have formerly been a military part or component, but has now been decontrolled through the government's export controls reform initiative from under the ITAR to the export administration regulations and under now the control of BIS. So you want to have that analysis documented as well. And then lastly, what's its end use? What are we going to do with this thing? What's our customer going to do with this thing? Is it military? Is it civilian? And do we need to be concerned about it? Thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for your attention. And those are just a few comments I have about controls programs. Happy to take any